Captain Hadiza Lantana Obo, 1959 to 1998, holds the distinction of being the first and only female pilot in the history of the now defunct Nigeria Airways Saidi Turn Search, Turn Sursach 12. Family and early background. Details about her early life remain sparse. She is reported to have been born around 1959, likely in Nigeria, and by the mid-1980s had made her way into the male-dominated skies of commercial aviation. Flying career. Hadiza began her aviation journey flying for a regional airline before joining Nigeria Airways in 1984 as a flight officer on the Boeing 737-200 Sight Turn Search 12 Turn Search 3. By 1989, she was widely recognized as a skilled, established pilot, becoming a celebrated figure throughout the 1990s, both within Nigeria Airways and as a beacon of pride for women's associations across Africa. Sight Turn Search 3 Turn Search 1. Personal life. She was reportedly single and lived alone at her upscale Ikoyi residence in Lagos. Friends and family visits were rare, suggesting that her focus was very much on her career. A lonely house in Ikoyi. The evening sky over Ikoyi, Lagos, was painted in strokes of gold and purple on February 8, 1998. The streets along Bordillion Road were quiet, with the soft hum of crickets competing with the occasional rumble of a passing car. Behind the high walls of number 40A, a three-story house stood in dignified silence, its modern architecture marked by whitewashed walls, wide glass windows, and an ornate black gate. Inside that gate, Captain Hadiza Lantana Obo, the pride of Nigeria Airways, the first and only female pilot in the airline's history, turned her car into the driveway. She had just returned from another day in the skies, guiding a Boeing 737-200 through the clouds like she had done for more than a decade. Flying was her life. It was what defined her, and, unknowingly, it was what made her a target. She parked, greeted the familiar faces of her domestic staff, the gatekeeper Abdullahi, the gardener Peter Idu Etche, and a young housemaid. Their smiles hid intentions darker than the night that was about to fall. In the kitchen, Hadiza changed into comfortable clothes, tied a scarf over her hair, and placed a pot on the gas cooker. The faint smell of palm oil soon filled the air as she hummed softly to herself. Her home, large and quiet, was her sanctuary. She had spent most of her adult life in the skies, and in the rare moments on the ground, she preferred solitude. What she could not see from the kitchen window was the silent exchange of glances outside, the signal that the plan they had nursed for weeks was about to unfold. Chapter 1. A Girl Who Dreamed of the Sky. Hadiza Lantana Obo was born around 1959 in a Nigeria full of promise. The nation was young, barely free of the shadows of colonial rule, and the air was alive with ambition. Her family was middle class, supportive of education, and well respected in their community. Hadiza's father, a stern but loving man, worked in a government establishment. Her mother, a gentle and encouraging woman, ran a small business and kept the home in order. Though specific records of her siblings remain elusive, stories from neighbors and relatives painted a picture of a bright, determined girl in a warm, disciplined household. From an early age, Hadiza was different from the other girls. While many played with dolls and imitated their mothers in the kitchen, she would lie on the grass outside her house, eyes fixed on the sky. Every time an airplane thundered above their home, she would jump up and wave, imagining herself at the controls. Her fascination with flying was unusual, especially in 1970s Nigeria, where women were expected to choose safe careers like teaching, nursing, or banking. "Mama, one day I will fly one of those," she would often shout, pointing at the silver speck disappearing into the clouds. Her mother would shake her head and smile. "My daughter, the sky is for birds, but if your heart is there, God will take you there." These words stayed with her. Chapter 2. A Dream Takes Wing. Hadiza excelled in her studies, showing special interest in mathematics and physics, the languages of flight. Her teachers noticed her unusual curiosity about machines and how things worked. In secondary school, while other girls decorated their notebooks with love notes and song lyrics, she filled hers with sketches of airplanes and cockpit diagrams. After secondary school, she announced to her family her dream: "I want to become a pilot." The living room fell silent. Her father adjusted his glasses and stared at her. A pilot? That is a man's job. Do you know how dangerous that is? But Hadiza was unshaken. Papa, I want to fly. I want to touch the sky. Her parents, torn between fear and pride, eventually supported her decision. It was an era when Nigerian parents rarely allowed daughters to pursue risky or unconventional careers. But Hadiza's determination was like the thrust of a jet engine, impossible to hold back. She gained admission into a flight training program abroad, joining a small cohort of Nigerians sent for professional aviation training. There, she learned the language of the skies, mastering the controls of light aircraft first, then progressing to larger commercial models. In those early days of flight school, Hadiza faced doubt and discrimination. Male instructors questioned her ability to handle the physical and mental demands of flying. Fellow trainees whispered that she would never survive cockpit pressure, but she answered every doubt with excellence. Her first solo flight, in a small trainer aircraft, was the moment she knew her life's purpose had fully taken wing. By the early 1980s, Hadiza Lantana Obo had earned her commercial pilot's license and returned to Nigeria with pride glistening in her eyes. Nigeria's aviation industry was growing steadily, and the national carrier Nigeria Airways was a symbol of prestige. Its white aircraft with the green tail logo were a familiar sight at Murtala Muhammed International Airport, Lagos, and representing the airline was a mark of honor. When Hadiza applied to Nigeria Airways, the interview panel was skeptical. "You are aware, young lady, that this is a very demanding career, yes?" one senior captain asked, scanning her papers. "Yes, Captain," she replied with calm confidence. "I know the risks. I have been trained for the skies. All I ask is for the chance to prove I can fly as well as any man." The panel exchanged glances. The airline had never employed a female pilot before. It was a male-dominated industry, where cockpits were considered no place for women. But her credentials, sharp intellect, and unwavering confidence won them over. In 1984, Hadiza became a flight officer for Nigeria Airways, primarily operating the Boeing 737-200. From that moment, history was written in the skies. Breaking barriers in the cockpit. Stepping into the cockpit as the only woman was intimidating at first. Her male colleagues watched her closely, waiting for mistakes. Passengers sometimes did a double take when they noticed a woman in uniform walking into the flight deck. But Hadiza had an aura of quiet authority. She memorized checklists to perfection. She handled turbulence with steady hands. She earned the respect of senior captains with her professionalism. One senior captain once admitted during a flight debriefing, "This girl flies cleaner than half the men we have." Passengers also began to notice her presence. Whenever she made announcements from the cockpit, people whispered, "A woman pilot in Nigeria Airways?" Her story spread through the media, and she became a symbol of female achievement in Nigeria. For a nation where traditional expectations still weighed heavily on women, Hadiza was living proof that ambition could defy gravity. Life between clouds and solitude. Hadiza's life was divided between two worlds: the skies, where she felt limitless, powerful, and free. Her quiet home in Ikoyi, where she lived alone, shielded from noise and distractions. Colleagues recalled that she was friendly but private. She rarely attended social events, preferring quiet evenings at home with a book, music, or the company of close family when they visited. Despite her success, she carried an invisible burden, a solitude that often accompanies trailblazers. Her life was comfortable: a modern house at 40 Berdilian Road, Ikoyi, luxury cars, foreign trips, and a reputation as Nigeria Airways' star female pilot. But her wealth and independence also drew envy. Her domestic staff watched the lifestyle they served, calculating in silence. Chapter 4: Clouds of Danger. By the mid-1990s, Hadiza was at the peak of her career. She had logged thousands of flight hours, and the aviation press occasionally featured her story as a national inspiration. But fame came with shadows. She had few trusted friends. Her household staff knew her routines: when she left, when she returned, what valuables she kept. She often returned late from flights, entering a quiet compound where only her employees could see her movements. Neighbors would later recall that her house seemed too quiet for a woman of her stature. They rarely saw visitors except her domestic workers and a few family members. It was in this bubble of solitude that a murderous plan began to grow. Aftermath. Treasure Part 3, The Night the Sky Lost Its Star. Chapter 5, February 8th, 1998. The sun had dipped behind the skyline of Ikoyi, casting long shadows over the quiet neighborhood of Bordillion Road. At 40A, the tall black gate opened slowly, and a familiar white car drove in. Captain Hadiza Lantana Obo stepped out, her posture still commanding even after a long day of flying. She carried a small handbag, and a faint smile played on her lips. Another day in the sky was behind her. Another evening of solitude awaited her. Her gatekeeper Abdullahi nodded as she passed. "Welcome, madam." "Thank you. How is the compound today?" she asked, always polite but distant. "Quiet, madam, as always." In the garden, Peter Idu Eche, the gardener, pretended to tend to the flowers. Behind his polite bow, a storm of greed was brewing. Inside, Hadiza slipped off her shoes, changed into comfortable clothes, and tied a scarf over her hair. She moved into the kitchen to prepare a simple evening meal. She placed a pot on the gas stove, poured a little palm oil, and hummed softly to herself. The house felt safe. She didn't know that safety was an illusion. The betrayal inside her own walls. For weeks, Abdullahi and Peter had plotted in whispers. They had watched her jewelry sparkle, counted the number of foreign currencies in her purse, and imagined the life they could buy if she were no longer alive. On that fateful night, their plan moved from fantasy to deadly reality. Abdullahi gave the silent signal, and the compound gate opened once more. Not for a visitor, but for conspirators. Hadiza in her kitchen was completely unaware. The attack was swift and merciless. She was grabbed from behind. A rope tightened around her neck. She struggled fiercely, knocking over a pot, but no neighbor heard the screams. The first and only female pilot of Nigeria Airways, a woman who had commanded the skies, died in the home she thought was her sanctuary. Her body was dragged outside, lifeless, under the same sky she had loved since childhood. A house of horror. The killers looted her belongings. Jewelry, electronics, cash in foreign and local currency. Then they turned to hide the evidence. Behind the house was a septic tank, a silent, dark pit. They lowered her body inside, then sealed it with fresh cement. By the time they were done, the kitchen still carried the smell of palm oil, the half-cooked dinner still on the stove, and a rope lay abandoned between the kitchen and the living room. Chapter 6. The disappearance days passed. Neighbors grew suspicious when no flights were scheduled with Hadiza's name. Her car stayed parked. The compound was quiet, except for the movements of her staff. Finally, concerned colleagues and family members alerted the police. When officers arrived, Abdullahi and Peter acted calm at first, claiming Madam had traveled. But a sickly smell and traces of fresh cement behind the house betrayed their lies. Police broke open the cemented septic tank. Inside, they found the lifeless body of Captain Hadiza Lantana Obo. Nigeria had lost its only female airline pilot, not to the risks of aviation, but to human betrayal. The arrest and the injustice. The police arrested Abdullahi, Peter, and other staff. Public outrage swept through Nigeria. Newspapers splashed her story across front pages, but in a shocking twist, the suspects were later granted bail under false identities and disappeared, leaving the murder unresolved to this day. The woman who broke barriers in the sky had fallen to the failures on the ground, a victim of greed, poor justice, and forgotten promises. Nation in mourning. When the news of Captain Hadiza Lantana Obo's murder broke, Nigeria was stunned. She had been a national symbol, the first and only female pilot in Nigeria Airways, a woman who had defied gender expectations and reached the clouds. Radio stations replayed interviews where she had once spoken about her love for flying. Newspapers printed her smiling face in uniform, beside headlines like, "Nigeria's only female pilot murdered in Ikoyi." The aviation community mourned deeply. Colleagues who once sat beside her in the cockpit wept at the thought of her final moments. "She was fearless in the sky," one senior captain recalled, "to think that it was the ground that betrayed her. It breaks my heart." Hash, a symbol of courage. Hadiza's death was more than a personal tragedy. It exposed the fragility of female achievement in a society still learning to value it. She had broken a professional barrier no Nigerian woman had crossed before, inspired countless girls to believe that the sky was not the limit but the beginning, proven that a woman could command the cockpit of a Boeing 737, a machine that weighed over 50 tons with steady hands and clear mind. Even in death, she remained a silent teacher, a reminder of both what women can achieve and how society must protect its trailblazers. Chapter 8, Justice Denied. The investigation into her murder became a national scandal. The domestic staff who had admitted involvement were arraigned. A magistrate court set bail conditions. Shockingly, the suspects were released on sureties who used false names. By the time authorities realized the bail paperwork was fraudulent, the killers had vanished. The case went cold, leaving a bitter taste in the mouth of her family, colleagues, and an entire nation that had once celebrated her as a hero. Her story faded from headlines over the years, surviving mostly as whispers in aviation circles and true crime retellings in Nigeria. Chapter 9, Legacy, Among the Clouds. Though her life was cut short, Hadiza Lantana Obo's story did not die. She paved the way for Nigerian women in aviation. Her courage inspired future female pilots like Chinyere Kalu, who became Nigeria's first female commercial pilot, and Adeola Sowamimo, who would go on to fly the Boeing 787 Dreamliner decades later. Aviation schools cite her name as a symbol of resilience and excellence. Whenever a female voice comes through the intercom of a Nigerian airplane announcing, open quote, "Good evening, this is your captain speaking," close quote, somewhere in the collective memory of the sky, it is as if Hadiza is smiling. Epilogue. The sky that holds her spirit. On quiet nights, planes still cross the Lagos sky, their lights blinking like stars in motion. Some pilots, especially women, say they think of her in those moments. The young girl who lay in the grass, pointing at the sky. The woman who commanded a Boeing 737, calm in turbulence, steady in storm. The pioneer who never got to grow old, whose name remains a whisper in the clouds. Her home on Bordillion Road is no longer hers. The gate is silent, the garden flowers bloom without her, and the kitchen that smelled of palm oil that night is just a memory. But in the boundless Nigerian sky, where she once soared above the clouds, Hadiza Lantana Obo lives on. Not in flesh, not in justice, but in every dreamer who dares to look up and say, "The sky is mine, too."